Alright, so let's look at a situation where we want to dynamically load some additional code, kind of like a plugin if you like. So I've got the standard web hosting project and a Silverlight project. I've started a little piece of UI, it's not very nice. So what we've got here is a text box via which you can specify you want to plug in assembly, click on load, and this red area is intended to be filled with the plugin. And then down here, the idea is I'm trying to build a text editor. So I want to build a text editor, but I don't know what kind of editor to use. So here's the text that's going to be edited. I'm going to leave this red area for a plugin to load itself up, edit the text for me, and then I can just use that as a plugin text editor. So let's define another Silverlight class library that's going to contain some interfaces. So in a class library, I'll call this interfaces. And let's put this in between our application and any plugin. So we won't have a class in here. What we'll have is some kind of abstraction of a text editor. So let's make this very simple. We'll have an interface, I edit text, something like that. And we'll have, you can return me a UI element. Those are the controls for editing the text. Let's say that I can set the text, let's say string text. I'll also say that this interface can fire an event when the text has been changed by the text editor. So let's have public text changed event args derived from event args. That should have been a class. Let's put the word class in there. And what we can then do is say, just put a string on there. Let's call that text. That's going to be the new text. And then on our interface we can have an event. Let's call text changed. And of course that is going to be event handler of text changed event args. And we'll call that text changed. So in a very simple way, we've abstracted ourselves from the details of a text editor in a very simple way. So let's go ahead and add a reference from our main project to this project. So we'll add a project reference across to that thing. So we'll go across to the interfaces project. Another project in here, which we'll call implementation as another class library. And between implementation, what we'll do from implementation is we'll add a reference to, whoops, wrong one. We'll add a reference to the interfaces again because we want that in there. So now we've got a reference to that. And we can build ourselves a text editor in here. Let's just say we'll have a class, we'll call it editor, implements I edit text. Let's just go and throw an implementation of that thing in there. Whoops. I'm going to paste some code in here to generate a bit of UI. So let's go and do that. I'll just paste some stuff in. I'm creating a stack panel. Into that stack panel I'm putting a text box, and into it as well I'm putting a button, and we're adding the text box and the button into the stack panel. Let's go and keep the set text and implement that. What I'm going to do is keep a text box around. So we'll just have a text box here. We'll call that text box. I've already used it up here. And I'll make sure that when we construct this thing, just for cheapness really, we will make one of those. So we'll just say equals new one of those. And when you come along to set the text on this thing, all we'll do is textbox.text equals the text that you've set. And then finally, when you click this button, what I'll do is add a handler. Let's just say and we'll put a handler in here. And when you click the button, we'll say if text changed is not equal to null, then what we'll do is text changed, and we'll say this and a new text changed event args, and onto that event args class we will pass the text, which is going to be textbox.text. So we built ourselves, I'm not sure we can compile at the moment, let's just try. Let's just, from our class library here, it looks like we're missing some references. So let's just go to our class library, add references to system.windows.controls. Make sure we pick up button there. Can we pick up button? Let's see if we can build. Okay, so I've built this little implementation of a text editor now. We've got I edit text. So what we need to do is wire all these things together. Let's go back to our sort of hosting Silverlight application. That's this guy here, and go to our page. And what we want to do is ensure that if we go to the XAML for this first, what we're going to do is that when somebody clicks on that load button up there, we want to load up the text editors. We want to write this on click function. So let's just go ahead and say on click. And at this point we need to go and download an assembly. Because we'll get the assembly name, that's going to be text plugin.text, whatever the user's typed on the screen. And we'll use the web client. We've looked at this in a previous video. We'll call that client. We'll create one of those. We'll say client.download, open read async, open read completed equals, let's say, on read completed. And we'll get rid of that just to shorten the code down a little bit. So we're going to asynchronously now request essentially the assembly from the web server. That's a relative URL. So if somebody's put that assembly on the web server, we'll download it. When it's completed, we'll get a call into this function here, and our job now is to load that up as an assembly. We use a class called AssembliesPart. We'll call this part and we'll create one. And then we can get an assembly from that by saying assembly equals part.load, and we can give it a stream. Now we'll have got a stream from doing our asynchronous read, so we can just grab the result of that. That will give us a stream. Now we've got an assembly. We've got the assembly, we can say assembly.create an instance, giving it a type name. Now that for us is going to be implementation.editor. So let's say implementation.editor. That's going to give us back an object. We want it as an iEditText. Let's call that editor, and we'll say equals that as iEditText. That shouldn't really fail for us. We should really check it. We should say if editor is not equal to null, then what we could do is create the UI. So back on the XAML here we have a grid, that red grid. Let's give that a name. Let's call that grid hosting, something like that. Let's pop back to the code. Let's say grid hosting dot children dot add, and we'll call editor dot get controls. So we're calling our plugin now to say give us some UI, and we're going to put that into this grid that we've got here. The other thing that we'd want to do probably is set the text. So we call editor.setText, and we pass it. We have a text block on the screen. I don't think we've given it a name yet, so let's go and give that a name as well. Here's our text on the screen here, so we'll call this text to edit, something like that. Let's just pop back to that code again. We'll say text to edit.text, pass that to the editor, and we want to wire ourselves up to the event handler to say when the text changed. We'll say on text changed. We'll fire an event. Let's just shorten that code down a little bit. And what would we do when the text is changed? Well, we want to say text to edit.text equals e.text. So we've just loaded that plugin. Let's go build. Let's make sure that on our site of origin in the client bin folder we actually have the interface assembly, which we don't right now. Sorry, the implementation assembly, which we don't right now. So let's just look at all the files here. Client bin. Let's get implementation.dll and let's drop it into client bin and paste it. Okay. Let's now press F5 and say OK. See what we get. So what we want to do is we want to load up implementation.dll. Let's try loading that. We can see here's our text editor appearing. Let's change this text to be foo. Click our button. There's foo changing around. So this isn't really about text editors and so on, and this isn't a very beautiful text editor. It's really more the point that we can dynamically load an assembly and we can create types from it by using AssembliesPart and assembly, sharing an interface in this case between something so that we've got a well-known type that we can program against, and then using that in order to do something dynamic with an assembly that we load from somewhere other than just the zap that we started from in the first place.